AES San Francisco.
Life's mission turned out to be to bring musical AI to musicians. So to bring the power of this technology to real people through being a CEO of WaveAI, we have products like Lyric Studio, which are designed to do specifically that. I'm also a musician myself. I'm actually an opera singer and music producer.
Awesome. All right, and back to Julius.
Julius Dobosh. I am a composer, used to be an engineer, and I turned to education. So now I'm teaching all this. I used to score movies, TV shows. I do a lot of synthesis and released a whole bunch of albums. I do shows, and I do have some tools that use AI-based technology, but I also draw the limits pretty low, as probably gonna here. I really believe in using technology as tools, but at the same time, I have tons of technology around me. But I'm a control freak, I guess, because I like to make my decisions. So that's my relationship with AI.
Awesome. Steve, you're next.
Hello, I'm a recording engineer and studio owner in Chicago. I have essentially no relationship with AI in practice. I make all of my records on analog tape. As a musician, I play guitar. There is some intersection with AI in sort of secondary ways, in that there are some iterative decision-making tools and some algorithmic processing used in, for example, disc mastering on records that I've worked on. So I have seen some utility for AI in those areas. I'm also a part-time poker player, and AI has become a powerful teaching tool, learning tool for creating difficult opponents in poker, for example, difficult synthetic opponents in poker, and for finding equilibrium points for decisions and sort of Nash equilibrium strategies in poker playing. So that's my relationship to AI. I don't have an opinion about its utility in music because I haven't tried it, but I'm hoping to learn something about it today.
Awesome. Thank you. Jonathan.
Hello. I'm interested in, so first of all, I want to say that the phrase AI is troubling to me only in the sense that it's such a catch-all phrase and can mean so many different things. You know, I might sort of want to split that hair a little bit later when we get into the nitty-gritty, but I'm really very interested in new technologies and ways that they can be assistive in creative acts, or else also be used in a way maybe that's not intended, to create interesting results in the context of creative works. I'm also really interested in AI and machine learning in the application of education and how it can give us insights into, based on statistical models, into phenomenon that sometimes help us understand our own work or other people's work better and differently. And so I'll stop there for the moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. And Alexander, who wins the award for the furthest travel.
Travel is nice. Yeah, I'm based in Europe, and I'm a DSP engineer and audio engineer, and I'm also the co-founder of Soundable. So we are a rather small company, and we are developing plugins that are using AI to provide some assisted mixing in the mixing context. And like for us, it was always interesting to see what's technically possible, and on the other hand, what's really available to the user. And we saw a quite big gap there. And that's why we started working on these tools about 8 years ago, and 5 years ago we released the first plugin. And AI, the nice thing about AI is that it's really powerful. The strange thing about AI is that it's really a buzzword too. So although we are building AI plugins, I'm also not the biggest fan of saying AI to everything, but I think it can be a great new technology that can be used for generative or assistive mixing in audio or speech.
Awesome. When you join late, you don't see what's in the chat ahead of time. So I'm going to repost the bios so you know who's here and who's speaking. All right. With that, we're going to talk about AI in just audio production overall. So what is AI? What is the user experience like? The audio engineering areas where we focus it on mixing, recording, live sound, and will an engineer be expected to know what's under the hood? Like what is going to be the expectation level when you walk into a situation of how much AI will or will not be involved going forward? Do we need to understand coding? Like what context of that? So we'll start with what is AI and the user experience like? So I'll just go backwards. So Alexander.
I think, or at least for since AI, depending on what kind of technology you're using, it can be kind of a black box system or it can be a model-based system. And if it's a black box system, it's quite hard to define or let people control what's happening. And we always thought that, or I personally think that it's nice to have some tool that can help you to reach a certain result, but you should always be able to influence the result and also get some insight into why this result is or why the system finds a certain result. That's why, for example, most people think about deep learning when talking about AI, which is like neural networks and so on. And if you use that, it's an end-to-end mapping system and you cannot really go into the system. It just does something like source separation. That's great. But if you're doing something like, for example, automatic compression, automatic EQing and whatever, what we are doing with our tools, then we also use this layer to get some information, but we use models in addition to that can be changed by the user. So the user can always kind of tweak and fine tune what's suggested by the AI. And that's what we call assisted mixing. So the idea is that the AI part takes away some of the groundwork that you would do anyway. And once you get creative, it's kind of, you can do or apply any changes that you want. And I think it's important that this level of control remains there, even if it's an assisted mixing tool.
And Jonathan. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what Alex said is, I agree with. I don't think that there's any way in which a practitioner would be expected to be coding or mucking around with setting up neural nets and so on. I think really at the end of the day, I mean, AI is based at least in part on being able to digest a large amount of data and quantify some attribute of some aspect of a signal, but ultimately it's the usability. It's the way that we're given to interact with it that makes it useful or interesting. We've certainly had experiences with the team at Isotope where, there's sort of this moment of like, well, we could analyze all this data and get this information, but so what? So what are we going to do with it? So what can people do with it? How can they leverage the information that they're getting? And so one example is a tool that helps people understand partial masking that happens in the context of a mix. Well, great, you get the number 17, that's some amount of partial masking. What do you do with that information? What does it relate to? How do you interact with the information that the data is giving you in a way to then achieve a result that you're after? I think it's very important to distinguish between automation and assistive technology. Assistive technology, which can help us either understand something better or kind of, as Alex is saying, it points you in a direction and then there's some parameters that help you make adjustments, but leave you in control once it's done, the analysis it's done or giving you the information it's given you, as opposed to automated tools, which at that point, they're just taking over and doing the work for you. And while they may have value in certain contexts, at the end of the day, probably in the context of creative work, automation is probably a little bit less interesting. So.
Awesome, thank you. And given when we were going through the topics, what Steve and Julia shared, I'm going to jump back to the first two, and I'll go to Dr. Ackerman in terms of the next two subtopics of that, of what audio engineering areas are being focused on, mixing, recording, live sound, like what's coming, and again, more around what do we think engineers will be expected to know.
I simply have to answer what is AI. It's literally what I do. So if you don't mind, I'll provide a response to that as well. There is so much confusion around it. And I teach artificial intelligence. I feel a need to just add a little bit to the discussion. AI is really about exhibiting intelligence, a system exhibiting intelligence, and it doesn't have to be human-like intelligence. Original AI was all about expert systems. So having systems that basically a person would know how they're doing something. They would have enough introspection to understand their own behavior so that that information could be encoded into the program. And then the program would be more or less as smart as the person who made it had introspection about their own processes. Since then, we've moved on to machine learning. And as Alexander pointed out, deep learning became synonymous with AI. But deep learning is not AI. It just sort of became synonymous with it. AI did not start with deep learning, and it's not going to stop with deep learning. So that might be helpful to keep in mind. As far as user experience, and where things are going back to Brian's question, I found it very interesting that Brian kind of brought up user interfaces right away, because we already have incredible AI-based systems that can help people be creative musically in so many different ways, but they're not served in a way that's helpful. And the last thing we need is for all musicians to be forced to become programmers. It's actually a waste of effort. What we need is to serve the AI in a useful way. And by useful, I mean that there's a spectrum that you need to be able to easily navigate. So somebody who is new, who maybe has zero musical experience, should be able to quickly create something. Maybe the AI did most of the heavy lifting, but they should still be able to make something. But it should have enough depth that as you use it more, and if you're an expert, which everyone here is, you can give a lot more of yourself. You can manipulate the AI a lot. You can only use parts of its suggestions. So for example, with Lyric Studio, it gives you suggestions for your next line of lyrics. And so it's the burden of the AI to give you good suggestions so that it's easier for you. But then ultimately, you're the decision maker as well. Some of our users just click on a whole bunch of suggestions, and essentially all they do is just select from the AI's ideas, whereas other users go very, very deep. So yeah, we want to have this depth of varied experiences that are easily adaptable. And I'm going to stop here because I can talk about this for days.
Thank you. Shahan, same topic. Where are we going, and what would engineers be expected to know?
Yeah, so I think just like Maya, I'm going to have to give my little bit of shedding what AI is or how it's perceived. I mean, if you kind of look at a very textbook kind of broad definition, you see even the reason why the term gets manipulated as a buzzword, which is kind of like any computer program that can perceive, and can act based on whatever sense of perception it was programmed to do. And machine learning, deep learning often is kind of treated as a subset of AI that has to be kind of like data driven. It's something that like doesn't kind of get like hand designed heuristics into the mix of it. So, in the audio realm, like then you kind of just have to ask yourself, well, what is a program that perceives, right? And I would almost argue that there are decades and decades of digital audio processors that could technically fit that definition. And even if that's an abuse of that term, it just kind of like I think of it as like a little bit of a lesson of how to take this on. And I've given this example of a compressor before, where technically a human could automate anything a compressor could do. All you needed is a fader and a few decades, right? And you could technically automate what a compressor does. But the compressor perceives the signal and knows when it gets too hot and knows, okay, I'm going to dip it down in certain ways. So this is kind of like just an interesting piece of it of a thing of like, something that you could be skeptical above, but then when it just proves itself of how useful it is, that you could see it showing up all the time, that kind of like barrier to entry, that barrier of actually like kind of taking it on and it be something that you want to use becomes obvious in time. Like, there are certain things that times where you're going to take the fader and you're going to ride the fader, but there's going to be other times that you're going to rely on it, or oftentimes you're going to rely on the compressor to be doing some of that dynamic leveling for you, right? So that's like one piece. And then another kind of piece that I want to kind of assert, and this kind of speaks more to the machine learning, deep learning side, is this idea of enabling types of processing that you couldn't even conceive. And it's because literally programmers couldn't program it on their own. They need to rely on this kind of data-driven scenario in which it kind of becomes an interesting thing. You kind of speak more about your aspirations, what you would like an algorithm to be doing, and you have to lead it through, and you need to understand how learning works and what is good for learning and what isn't, and kind of all those quandaries and the like. But then it kind of becomes a thing of like, all right, just imagine what you would like it to do, and find a way to make it happen. And that's why, like in neural network and deep learning talk, there's this like kind of theorem of like neural networks being a universal approximator of any function. And that right there that's the chasing the dragon feeling in all of this, because what it means to be a universal approximator of any function. Now you can define a function as whatever it wants. It could be something that takes images and maps them to a description, or it can take audio and can map them to a caption describing how the audio, or like features of the audio, or like source separation, where you kind of given this stereo mix down and it can decompose into different parts. It's like whatever you can kind of conceive as a function that you'd like to approximate. And if there's kind of like the math and the data behind it to make it happen, technically there's a world in which we might be able to approximate. And that's why people really chase the dragon and really assert that this is like a technology that is worth kind of delving into further.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to come back to Julius and Steve. We'll talk about music production. And if you want to jump back to what we just talked about, feel free. But in terms of music production, and Steve, when I come to you, I'm fascinated by this whole poker thing when you were talking about that. That's very interesting. But Julius, first, in terms of like music production, expecting what you would get from AI, knowing nothing or knowing a lot, or what you want to imagine. So what would you expect from AI in music? And do you think this is for amateurs or pros or everybody in between? So I'll just throw those two pieces out to you, and then we'll go to Steve.
Well, my quick and ugly answer would be I would really expect it to stay out of the way when it comes to music production, and I'll elaborate on that. That's why. But I would like to jump back to what Alex said a little bit that I really liked, but I have a question about. Alex said that AI could take care of the more mundane tasks in, let's say, mixing, and then when it comes to the creative work or the creative fun, then you could take the control back and make those decisions. And I believe that's how every tool should work at the very maximum. But my question is, how do you define where creativity starts? Because I'm thinking, like, for mixing work, I'm thinking back, okay, editing, naming the tracks. Sure, maybe based on what the name of the clips are, or based on recording the instrument, or just analyzing the recording, it can name the track for me. Sure, I have no problem with that. But those of you who do editing, for example, taking or not taking out a breath can be a very creative decision. So even the most but would like to think of the least creative tasks. How would AI know which way I prefer it? Or Jonathan, I think mentioned other parts of the mix. Let's say if there's a conflict in the mix. I'm sure Steve would agree that there are so many ways of resolving conflicts. There shouldn't be a conflict, but if there's a conflict, there's so many ways of resolving that. Sometimes it can be a creative solution, sometimes a purely technical solution. How does AI know when to stay out of my business?
Julius, if I may, I'm going to quote Young Guru, who talks directly to this, and he says he doesn't really start being creative and mixing until he's gotten his initial balance. So if you imagine an AI tool that establishes a balance, so then you can react to it. You know, if a system has eliminated something entirely from your view and you don't know that it's there, that's a problem. Then you have trouble sort of making some kind of subjective decision or something based on your own aesthetic and curating that decision. But it is possible that you can short circuit purely mechanical steps to get you to the point where you're starting to react. So that's one way to think about that. Sort of, it blurs the line a little bit between making the initial decision or adjustment and then letting you take it from there.
If I may also add to this response, so also it ties in with some of the comments I'm seeing here. So in many ways, AI can come in for things that we don't necessarily want to do, which is sort of what I hear people commenting on, which is very insightful. And I think that's kind of how we are used to thinking of AI as, you know, something that's the stuff we don't want to do, and outside the context of music, maybe like does our dishes and vacuums for us too. I come from the field of creative AI. In fact, computational creativity, which I just read on the comments, is a contradictory term. That was fun. And so where AI can be really helpful and where we're really not doing enough is to use AI to help us explore the creative space. So explore creative possibilities. And I really like the human in the end to make all the decisions. So all the AI does, it shows you some options. And if you don't need the AI to give you options for a specific task or at a specific point, don't solicit the options. Much like another human collaborator, except here you have all the control. So it actually has, you know, a little bit of advantages in some sense over a human collaborator, of course, not in all sense.
So you mean your assistant listens to everything you tell him? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I think what Maya said is absolutely true. On the other hand, you can also see, like, it depends on what kind of tool you have, I think. And if you have, for example, tools that we have like in the queue, there are certain things that you get a recording and then there is some problem in there, some resonance, whatever. And everyone who knows how to mix would pull out this resonance because it's just a problem of the recording. And and that's what AI can do for you. You can kind of make it more or less clean or neutral. And once you get this point, you can start working creatively and edit, you know, have the sound you want or modify it the way you want. But it is, let's say you make some mistake during recording, and so you have a problem there, and then the AI fixes it for you, and you start working. It is as if you didn't have the problem in the first, you fixed something. If you recorded it correctly, you would have the same starting point, you know. So you don't have to do all the manual work just to get to kind of prepare your canvas for painting, if you imagine it like that. So I think certain things are really objectively just there to be fixed, and then starts a very blurry line that says, okay, this is really just a technical problem. Here it becomes a bit subjective, and this is definitely the subjective part. And actually that is, if you're building tools for mixing, this is really a quite big challenge also for us to draw a line to at a certain point to say, okay, we fix it up to there, or we let the AI do it up to a certain extent, and we leave the rest to the user. And that's why we always, for example, let the user control the impact of the AI and so on, to have some, so that the user can basically say to what extent the AI fixes stuff for him or her.
See, I'm sorry. I want to push back on that a little bit, because I I'm with you to the point where you can say, you can identify sort of typical problems, phenomenon that people struggle with on a regular basis, and give them insight into it. But that is the point at which I want to stop, because I'll tell you, I'll say two things. One is, sometimes the most interesting recordings are the ones that go in the other direction. Rather than correcting, what if we made that resonance worse? What if, we see this display of partial masking between two channels, and we decide to exaggerate it so we get a new blend, so we're getting insight that's based on, our analysis of a signal, and based on well-informed sort of, analysis of the physics of sound and physics of phenomena and what we understand that people struggle with. But what you do next is what's really interesting. And so I would rather drop people off in that moment where we say, here's a thing, here's a phenomenon that we've identified. Now what do you want to do? Rather than sort of drive towards an idea of correctness.
I'd love to briefly comment here. This is super, super interesting. So traditionally, AI is viewed as something that has a ground truth. That's sort of the technical term. I'm sure Shahan and Alexander, et cetera, could chime in with that as well. So traditionally, it's about doing the right thing, figuring out what's the most common answer and doing that. And that's what Alexander was referring to. And I think that music has so many layers in it, and the word layers can mean many different things here as well, that not every musician wants to do every single piece. And sometimes it's nice to have some decisions made by another person or by a machine, because that's not your expertise. But it's also important to emphasize that AI can also help you in areas where you do want to be really involved. So you have these different options. You have cases where AI can help you by AI making a decision that's common, and you don't mind because that's not what you're focusing on in your creative process. And AI can also help you explore the creative space where there is no right answer by any definition. If you're writing lyrics, there is no right lyrics. That's absurd on the face of it. But it just helps you figure out, okay, what are my options? And then you're in control of the symphony, if you will.
Yeah, I like to just impart, first of all, I think that this entire conversation about this really is speaking to a very small subset, which Maya's kind of got into it, where we're talking about how can AI be used in kind of like an assistive workflow type of capacity. But AI is capable of many, many other things that I'm sure Maya has a lot of experience kind of more on the generative side of things. And yeah, that's like, what do I want to say about it? I think that it's interesting. Basically, Julius, what you're kind of asking us is, how do we try to find objectivity in subjectivity? And I think that that's kind of like, there's like a little bit of a PSA here that, when we are making these quantitative algorithms, there are certain type of algorithms that the number goes down, that means we're all good. But the other piece of this is like, as a developer, it's to be able to establish the right type of subjective testing that, when done across enough participants, potentially can be taken as objective enough that we think it could actually be worth rolling with it, in that it might make more sense to use it than to not use it, maybe 80% of the time or not. And the other great thing about AI is that, honestly, it's there and it gives its input, and you can tell it to shut up whenever you want to, which is like, if you consider the other side where you're not even given the other voice, like, it's kind of like, why not even hear someone else's opinion,
If I might just, I was told we were encouraged to disagree, so maybe that will be fun, Shahan, if I can have your permission. I think AI so often tries to give you the right answer. Google is all about giving you the best website that you're looking for in answer number one. But I feel very, very strongly, and maybe my opinion is subjective here, that when it comes to helping creatives, when appropriate, we should be giving them options instead of a correct answer. And I also wanted to point out that our systems are generative. So generative and assistive are the same thing for me. We are generating ideas, but instead of telling the user, hey, your next melody or your next line of lyrics should be this is what our algorithms decided, we work very, very hard to have measures that tell us how good the suggestions are. But then we give them to the user. We do our very, very best to generate good content, and then we put the user in the driver's seat. Options. I feel very, very strongly about options, but I'd love to hear why.
I actually, the funny thing is that I actually agree with you. So it's like, we're in total agreement too. So.
So Julius, did that cover what you were getting at? Because I have a question for Steve, but I'm going to wait until.
I would like to jump back into music production and composition aspect, but let's hear from Steve before that.
So, hearing what you've heard so far, Steve, and you work primarily in the analog domain for music production, but at some point it's got to get digitized because it goes out the world through streaming. So there's some point in your workflow that happens. And hearing what we've talked about so far in terms of taking out either mundane tasks or things, are there things that you would like to exist in the analog world that could take things off your plate, or not? Just from what you've been hearing so far.
To Sean's point about how originally compression, how compression could be replaced by a very agile engineer and a fader. Compression was actually invented as a means of controlling audio for the limited dynamic range of optical recording on film soundtracks, for example. And the idea was that it would then replace the technical engineer who was adjusting the recording levels all the time to keep within the headroom of the optical recording medium. And what happened, as we know, is that it didn't replace the recording engineer, the sound recording engineer. The sound recording engineer's job just became adjusting the compressor as opposed to controlling the level or choosing the compressor in a more comprehensive way. So the idea that AI is a threat to engineers and their employment or something of that nature, I think that's a fallacy. I don't think we need to worry about that at all. And for example, the few instances where I have interacted with AI in, for example, iterative decision making or algorithmic processing, where you can create a dynamic filter that looks for a certain pattern in a Fourier transform of a moment of sound, and then can find that same, like a plosive on a speech pattern or a sibilant S or something like that, and can then scan a file, find all of those things, and nuke them, and you can audition the results. I think those are quite useful as tools, directed tools. The complication comes from the way AI functioned, or the way AI learns. In games, for example, the way Deep Blue learned chess was just by playing 1 billion chess games and noting the results. Like, these were good results, these were bad results. And because there are unambiguous winners and losers in games, AI is very good at learning strategies to play games. And that's my exposure to AI is in the realm of poker, where AI has become a very powerful tool for finding equilibrium strategies for bet sizing, for example, in a no-limit game, or bet frequencies or hand selections. And and there are solvers available that run these Monte Carlo simulations where the same problem occurs again and again and again, and all possible choices are made, and eventually there's a table that results that shows you an equilibrium strategy which can't be defeated, right? If that approach is applied to music in the main, you would need an unambiguous result as to whether something was successful or unsuccessful musically. And the problem is that there is no unambiguously good or unambiguously bad music. Even the mundane sort of cleanup tasks that were being described earlier, there was an entire genre of electronic music, the glitch techno music, that came from the incorrect or erroneous application of digital processing tools by novices in the digital realm, and creating a distorted form of music, which then acquired its own aesthetic. And I understand the idea that just because these corrective measures can exist intelligently and correct these problems, it doesn't mean that you can't turn them off. I just want to I just want to remind everyone that, for example, predictive texting has become essentially a default for many people. And if these corrective measures, these removing the mundane chores, as you describe them, if that becomes the default for music production, then there are entire creative pathways that become closed off just by the sort of default nature of that. And even in the simplest things in our lives, communicating with our loved ones over the telephone, by text message, that this technology has become the default. These adaptive or predictive things have become the default, and we end up insulting or miscommunicating because of the ubiquity of a tool that was intended to clarify our language, right? I'm quite fond of, there was a hip hop engineer, a producer named DJ Screw, who lived in Houston, and his entire aesthetic was developed from a process of wrecking and chopping, or taking existing recordings and making rather clumsy edits to them. And I think for all of the benefit that there may be in mundane music and mundane chores, for these corrective tools to be sort of automatically solving problems like that, I think we need to be aware that if that becomes the default, if that becomes routine, then we are genuinely snubbing out a creative avenue for people who might otherwise have found it if there was no automation in play. Now, I want to make a couple of distinctions here. There are different kinds of music mixing and recording. The music and mixing and recording that's being used for things like TV commercials or film soundtracks or gaming or things like that, where there are many competing interests involved and there's not a single creative vision being expressed. I think these tools that can balance many competing interests there may be an iterative process where you could find out how generally discernible dialogue is over music, and then sort of generally automate the dialogue level over the music level in a multiplayer gaming environment, for example, something like that. I see no problem with that sort of thing, because I can see for myself anyway that there is a hierarchy of these different magisteria. And if music being made for its own sake by creative people making music, for me, would be at the very top of that hierarchy. And for my interest in those people, my role as an engineer is to execute their creative vision, their creative impulse, give them freer expression of the creative impulse, which is an extremely powerful primal urge in people. It's as powerful as the mating instinct. And my role as an engineer is not to do that for them, but to enable them to do that for themselves. And I think any predictive or generative system that takes that role from them or interferes with that role is a net negative, regardless of its utility in things like perfume commercials or gaming or the greater web landscape.
Yeah, I just, if you don't mind that I respond to two of Steve's points that I resonate with very, very, like, I don't know how many varies I have to say. But the first thing was this kind of like, this adaptation of skill sets. And I think that's kind of like the interesting thing of, like, we were saying that, like, there was the person that was, doing some automation of faders to make sure that things didn't kind of saturate on the optical tapes and the like. And now the sound engineer is more responsible for setting up the compressor the right way. I think that's kind of like a right way of thinking of, like, where it shifts the focus. And we as developers of AI tools just need to make sure that we are not making things clunky, over-engineered, and counterintuitive. And then on the user side, they need to think of, like, okay, this used to be my bread and butter, but the game has changed. How does that make me adapt just kind of like what I bring to the table and just the view with which I should be like kind of perceiving endeavors from now on? That's like one interesting point of it. And then to the second point, I don't know when this analogy is going to kind of die, but just bear with me. Like what I was just thinking about was like, there's also this kind of like, we haven't kind of got into like the type of user that is going to use these types of things, like who is a creative person, who is a high-end user and the like. And it's just interesting to think of like, you know, maybe I'm showing my age, but back in when I was growing up and getting into technology, there are these things called like Angel Fire websites, and you could design anything to your heart's content, right? And if you look at most of them, they're frankly not very good, right? And then WordPress came out, right? And they make these nice spiffy templates. And now if someone brute forced it with Angel Fire, it wouldn't be a drop in the bucket compared to what you see on a WordPress site. But the problem is, do we want to be listening to WordPress sites all the time? And it's kind of just like that ownership that I am still wanting to be a creative person. These tools do exist, and I'm not gonna rely on them solely. And I still am my own human voice with whatever's going through my head and my heart that I'm still gonna impart in everything that I do. And I'm just gonna utilize these things at my leisure and maybe learn something about my own workflow that might change, or that I don't have to think about this and I'm gonna start to think about this because this kind of stuff is already kind of taken care of for me. So I'm not really kind of concretely like prescribing something, but it's just some interesting feelings that I felt as Steve was talking.
I'd love to also comment on some of Steve's and the issues that Steve brought up, and Jean pitched into that as well. So I think some of the concerns that Steve brings up are very, very, very important things to discuss. And I found it really interesting that he brought up this idea that AI can actually take creativity away from people. And I'm not going to go ahead and say that that's impossible, that has never happened, because Steve gave really excellent examples where we know that it did happen. But I do want to draw attention to the opposite, how AI can open up creativity where it wasn't possible previously. So we work, at WaveAI with both professionals and amateurs, or people who are completely new to music making. And with our systems, they can create novices, little kids can create songs in 5 minutes, songs with words that they make, because there is so much AI support. Again, you don't have to lean on it as heavily if you're a professional. So even, for example, we did a bereavement study with people who are not songwriters, who were able to write songs about their loved ones with our system, Alicia. And we found that this had mental health benefits in the context of bereavement. So AI can open up creativity, even if perhaps it's sometimes, if people over-rely on it or rely on it kind of senselessly. I agree with Steve that there are some things to consider there as well. And one more thing I want to briefly mention. Yes, most of AI in games, in chess, in poker, there is a ground truth. But creative AI, ground truth is the enemy of creative AI, in my opinion. The AI algorithms, when we do generation, don't have a ground truth, and there is a way to do artificial intelligence without a ground truth. This is not a plug. I have no financial benefit for it, but for those of you who are interested in understanding those, there's a wonderful community that I'm a part of called Computational Creativity, and there's a conference going on right now for it. So there you could learn more about how to do AI without a ground truth that really fits creative domains.
So I'd like to come back to Jonathan and Alexander on kind of where we're going to head anyway, but Steve brought it up with the predictive texting. So AI making music, if you're making chordal decisions or melodic decisions and going down that path. And I'm not going to say anything else. I'll start with Alexander.
Generative AI is currently not what we are putting a lot of research into, in our company, but personally, I found it quite interesting, and I played around with different tools that for example, suggest chord progressions or suggest a accompanying melody if you play something. And for me personally, it's really fun, and quite often you may get some inspiration and then start working on that. And it's really like, and that's maybe the similarity between the assisted mixing AI and generative AI, and let me separate, like I call it that way, so maybe it's the same for you, Maya, but and because if you have the assisted mixing AI, it is as if some person who knows how to mix, for example, is sitting next to you and helps you to accomplish some goal. And if you have the generative AI, it is as if some other person, maybe playing another instrument, is sitting next to you and you may get inspired by it. So for me, I love to see AI tools really as if it's some other person or some other idea giving thing that's there and that supports you in what you're doing. And if you don't want to listen to it, you can always ignore it. And you can even kind of debate with it if you have some other idea and then the tool does something different. So it's funny how even new things can arise from some input that maybe that you may not agree with, but then you change it and something new emerges. And in terms of things like not having a ground truth, and it's true in EQing, you never have the real ground truth. Still, for example, we suggest with our tools some solutions, and in the first tool that we brought out 5 years ago, we had the opportunity to kind of control the impact, and we even had the negative impact, and we just included it there because the GUI was more intuitive with a negative impact. And after a couple of weeks, we found out that a lot of people used it inversely because they could kind of exaggerate the specific characteristics of a signal. So they used it in a way we never designed it to be used. And we really loved it because it kind of showed, okay, it's just a new kind of tool, and what people make of it is what people make of it. So in the end, it's always the decision of the user. But as I said, like, I don't have too much expert knowledge, really like deep expert knowledge on the field of generative tools like melody suggestion and so on. So maybe that's something for Maya or.
Okay. Well,
actually,
Julius, I was gonna, if you want to talk about, because you've done this with human feedback, so I'll let you talk.
This is the part where I definitely draw the line for myself. And someone in the chat mentioned that, literally stealing the thought, that's like pulling the thoughts out of my head, functional audio, functional work versus artistic work. And as long as things are kept functional, and the sibilance or the recording that based on the data that the AI machine uses, among humans, it's agreed that it's bad, so the tool fixes it, but you still have the bypass button if you want to have that problem in your song because it's a creative decision. I'm all fine with that. Where I get really worried is where we talk about artistic use or creativity. I might set my stance a little bit high, but when I talk about creativity, I imagine the word in its true meaning, to create something from nothing, as opposed to combine previously used elements. And to me, the key to that is to have a concept with some substance behind it. When Steve mentioned discussing with a band or with an artist what is their message, what they want to convey, and assisting them to kind of convey that unfiltered message in its purest form, I think that's an artist's dream, right? I think probably it's true that most people on this call got into this because of our passion for audio, because you want to create something. And how do we measure that? How do you quantify the results of that? Well, I don't think it's data. It's kind of like feelings. If you have a certain experience or feelings that you want to express, that it has to be so many billions and billions of components. I don't think you can quantify that. If anyone says you can, then tell me how you quantify love and how you turn that into data. Because if you go on a date with someone, you drive fast, you go to the ocean, and after that experience, like a first date, and after the experience, you want to express that using one of these languages, let's say music or painting or poetry. then you're trying to channel your feelings through these universal languages and express something that no one has or will ever be able to, because it's such a specific experience. You can measure the speed of the car or the hue of the sunset, and you can quantify all that, but put that together and it's still not going to express exactly that very personal feeling that you felt. I don't want to receive a creatively written greeting card or an anniversary card from someone who actually used an AI tool to compose it, and at the end, yeah, I like it, and hit enter, but I would be offended. I would like to have the true feelings and kind of the true unique ideas expressed, because one way we can measure how good, because there was a lot of chat comments like, how do you define good, and how do you measure good? I tell you how I do that: originality. If of course we're all influenced by subconsciously and sometimes consciously by what's happening around us and before us, but that's my other problem with AI. If it's based on the collective experience of humans in the past, since we can't see it into the future, combinations of that can be interesting and fun, but then you're just combining the data. You can't combine people's feelings or original intentions. So I personally reject the idea that AI is going to write some melody and because I define a few variables, and that's going to compete with anything that's as honest and as genuine and authentic as someone going through a hard or good or whatever personal experience.
I'm going to go to you, Dr. Ackerman, because I see you writing frantically, furiously taking notes over there. But before I do that, Julius, you've ruined everything for me. All those Hallmark cards I've been using for decades were all AI. They were all making my...
That's why I always buy the blank ones and handwrite it myself.
Oh, I'm all bummed out now. All right, Dr. Ackerman, you've been taking notes.
Yeah, you brought up so many important topics. It's just really, really amazing. I just want to like debate with you in a room for 8 hours. You've pretty much touched on most of the things we focus on in computational creativity. So the first thing I want to very briefly mention is that how we view creativity is very culturally specific and very historically specific. So, for example, we like to think of an artist as sort of an independent being, which I think is wonderful, and I'm a big supporter of. But in a very real way, creativity has not been fully independent for a very long time. For example, when the acoustic piano came out, that was considered cheating. There was a lot of pushback against acoustic pianos, which is kind of hard to imagine right now. Am I cheating by playing piano? But yes, that was cheating. When people used to paint originally, they used to have to mix their own paints and make their own brushes. If you look at visual artists in ancient Greece and Rome. Of course, nowadays, if you buy paints or buy brushes, nobody's going to claim that you're cheating. So in a way, there is some low-level collaboration happening anyways. But even in a bigger way, a lot of songs are written collaboratively. Professionals write lyrics collaboratively. They write full songs collaboratively. And as a result, actually, people who are a little bit below professional, people who are trying to move up the ladder to become professionals, are actually at a big disadvantage. Because here they are expected to do everything by themselves, when the real professionals have the help of real human professionals. So just something to keep in mind. You brought up the issue of evaluation, which is a massive topic in computational creativity. And we don't trivialize it. We don't claim that we can easily say if something is creative or not. But we do take it very seriously. And one of the best ways to evaluate something, again, not perfect, but just in order for brevity, I'll just only mention this very briefly. So if you have a piece of music, whether it's written by a human or by an AI or written by both of them together, you can give it to a group of people, either experts or listeners, and get their opinion. And that gives you some sense of evaluation. So it's not completely vacuous. We can do something. It's not perfect. And again, there's many other things we can do as far as evaluation. Again, none of it is perfect in the evaluation space. That's a very, very big challenge. And I also think we should really separate AI that creates by itself versus AI that helps people be creative. You mentioned self-expression and how it's so you're not interested in seeing what an AI created because it doesn't feel anything. So why would you want to hear what it makes? And that's legitimate. And that's in a way why AI is not a threat to us, because we're not interested in what AI has to say. But a lot of people have a lot to express, and they can't because they don't have enough of the musical skills. And so, for example, some of our, well, pretty much all of our users, especially on the Alicia platform, write songs to express themselves, to write about breakups, to write about the political climate. And without the AI tools, they wouldn't be able to express themselves. So really everything that I do in my work is about helping people to express themselves. And those who don't need the AI tools shouldn't use them, right? And even professionals struggle with writer's block and need ideas and go to other humans to collaborate with them. And with an AI tool, you actually maintain more of the ownership and more of the creative process because you are the final decision maker on the entire process. Okay.
I actually appreciate that you're calling them tools, because to me, when you create, you use tools, but tools don't create. You use them, and that's my problem with the whole argument, that I don't want to let a tool create, because then I'm reversing the whole process. I don't think that humans are in such a dire situation that we run out of ideas. And I don't agree with the analogy with neither the paint or making your own brush or the piano, or I know that very often people use the MIDI. Okay, we had MIDI, and everyone thought that there's not going to be performers and orchestras and whatnot, and I very much like and appreciate the side effect of that. All those composers, Vangelis comes to mind, who by himself created the kind of music that would have been extremely difficult. By the way, he didn't use sequencers, so that's another interesting thing. Not that much MIDI either. But what my problem is with that is that when you have a tool that is supposed to assist you, if that leads the way and comes up with the ideas, it's just too easy to buy into that, not maybe for professionals, but for the masses. And that can easily start bringing down the quality and kind of devalue music, because not everyone can put anything out. And if you're not an expert, if you don't have, if you have never taken a music theory class, they're gonna say, "Yep, it's good. It makes me feel good. It's good in the background in the car." There are applications that know that, I know that do that. Just have to select the mood, the style, and it gives you a continuous flow of music. I would not mention that in the same category as a band or an artist actually having a concept, expressing that from previous experiences, channeling that through music to their audience. And we're talking about tools. I think Steve is I know some of Steve's work and watch some of his videos on YouTube where he demonstrates how he uses tape machines. Well, to me, that's part of art, even though that's a tool. But the way he uses those tools that gives a certain flair, a certain flavor to what comes out of his studio, to me, that's part of art, because he's using the tools, but he's not letting the tape machine dictate that. I'm sure if the band doesn't want that sound, they probably wouldn't even go to Steve, or he might use different tools. I hope that makes sense.
Well,
If I may,
if I might speak in defense of the suitability of analog recording, I would say that any competent analog engineer, if he noticed that the tape machine was making things sound different, he would stop and fix it. And I certainly do. So I don't think that there is any special magic sound to recording on tape. I genuinely don't think that there is an argument against digital recording on a purely sonic level at this stage. Early on, when the sample rates were low and the bit depths were low, digital recording didn't have a very good sound quality, but anything 24 bits and anything with a reasonable sample rate now sounds perfectly fine with a decent system. I have no beef with digital recording on a sonic level, and I think it would be a mistake to ascribe any kind of magic sound to analog recording just on the basis of it being an analog recording. Analog systems are they're electromechanical and physical systems, so it's slightly more cumbersome to do some of the circus tricks that you can do in the digital domain quite easily. So those circus tricks tend to be used more rarely, but essentially anything that can be done in the digital domain can be done in the analog domain with, given enough time and effort. It's just that this speaks to something that you were saying earlier, Julius, which is that once it is trivially easy to do something to alter the sound, then it's often done just to see, as an experiment, just to see, because it's trivially easy to do it. And as a result, those tools get used more. Editing a multi-track tape in the analog domain might take you 30 seconds or so. Editing a segment in the digital realm might take a fraction of a second. So because it's so much easier to do, digital sessions are edited dramatically more than analog sessions are. Not because they necessarily require that degree of editing, but just because the editing tool is so much easier to use, it gets used as a default to solve problems. My concern, if I have a concern, and I'm not certain that I do have a concern about AI in music production, my concern is that these corrective tools and these generative tools are going to become defaults in the same way, because it's simple enough. Like, it'd be nice to have a backing vocal here. Let's see what the computer comes up with for a backing vocal melody here. Oh yeah, that counter melody backing vocal that the computer made is fine. Let's just go ahead and use that. That kind of rampant laziness must be familiar to everyone who works in the studio, because you have so many tools at your disposal that you just try things out on a lark, and every now and again you end up with a massive hit for share or something, because you tried some goofy thing and somebody said, that sounds cool, leave it. I'm not even arguing against those things, despite how horrible that Cher song was. I'm not even arguing against those things on a fundamental level. My concern is that when there is a baked-in notion of correctness to music, which is the function of a learning system is to find the correct path through a complex system. And when those tools have baked into them a correct notion of music, that concerns me, because my entire life has been enriched and based, and the building you see behind me, the studio I'm sitting in, the wife I have, the house I live in, all of that stuff is a result of working in the incorrect domain of music. And it concerns me that in the same way that predictive text has taken over normal incorrect texting, which with its typos and other charming mistakes, my concern is that the default will become so embedded with this notion of correct that breaking free of that paradigm will require an extraordinary amount of effort.
Yeah, so I actually share some of the concerns of Julius and Stephen, what they're saying. At the same time, there's some perspective as a musician that I hope that I've expressed myself musically at least one time organically in my life, that there are some interesting things on the generative side. The first thing I kind of want to get back in is it's easiest to characterize me as like a jazz musician or coming from a jazz lineage, which means I'm like bottom of the barrel in terms of like human being, I guess. But one thing that like you have going for you when you're trying to learn about jazz, it's really, you have your sense of melody and you just want to be a sponge for everything that's around you. And like for me, like the most inspiring moments when I kind of get into like making a composition is when I see a show that just wows me, and I come back and I come up with an idea, and you know what? It ends up kind of being like 75% sounding like one of the tunes that was over there. But at the moment I was kind of like really engulfed in that sound, and it's something that came out. Another thing that I'll kind of bring up is like, there even comes a point when your improvisation and just kind of like your ear training, where you actually rely on like studying permutations of like sequences and the like, and you actually find the permutations and the sequences that do something for you, and you say, I'm going to take this. And it's kind of like a little bit of a mechanical process by which you actually can expand your sense of melody by allowing yourself to do kind of even like randomly selecting permutations and being like, this one's melodic to me, this one's not melodic to me, this is kind of speaking to my personality, not. So imagine that an AI melody generator generates some sort of like six note phrase, and you haven't heard 6 notes kind of like that before, and it just sparks something that doesn't need to be those 6 notes. Now again, the problem is all in this onus of mainstream ethics of like, does the buck stop after we click the render button from them, or is it just like, do we take that upon ourselves to keep on moving it forward into something else?
So Jonathan, I know you haven't.
Yeah, I don't know if I can actually wind my way back through all these different things that I've been reacting to, but I'm going to try. So one of the things I want to call out here, well, the first thing I want to say is I actually don't believe that AI takes away creativity. And I actually truly believe what Steve says, which is that we have a desire, an urge to be creative. I don't think that the machine can take that away. I think what we do with prompts, with inputs, is up to us, ultimately. So that's a point that I think is really important to make. I think that there's a little bit of some bias in some of the statements that are being made that reveal kind of a classicist approach. We are married to processes and expertise that we have developed a certain way, whether, and Julius, with all due respect, learning how to write, compelling serial technique music, or learning how to play Chopin on a piano, that takes years, right? That's not something that's easy to shortcut. If there's something about that process and that art form that you love, then you don't want to give over the control to the machine to do that. But let's take an art form like collage. Collage is made up of pre-existing pieces. Some collage is crap, some collage is amazing, right? It's not that the DNA, there's anything wrong with the DNA of what's being used, or the fact that using these pre-existing pieces has somehow hampered someone's creativity. They've decided to do something with it. Another example we could use, I've got a Casio piano behind me. I could push a button and it could make some noise that someone programmed into it. It sounds like music, but I could do some pretty wacky things with those pre-existing fragments that I think in some ways are almost like a precursor to at least some of the things we're referring to when we're calling out AI. So I think we have to be very careful about exercising our sort of judgmentalism and being overly moralistic about this. I think there's another aspect that I want to call out here. And Shahan, a long time ago, you were talking about how we adapt as technology changes. And I think underneath that, for me, there's the question, are the robots taking our jobs? Right? I mean, there's always that sort of theme, that undercurrent here. And both in the chat and I think also in our discussion, there's been production music has been called out. There's kind of lowest common denominator, purely functional music. Frankly, for the last X number of decades, that's required a person to execute it. Well, guess what? If you look at Ampere Music, they've got a platform that can generate, based on AI, completely functional production music. Jobs go away there. Now, you could say those are people who might be creative and they were actually in an economy that supported them so that they could then go off and do creative things, and that's disappearing. And so what do those people do? Well, maybe they get good at figuring out how to distill the formulaic music and contribute to the building of compelling AI models. I'm not sure what the answer is there, but I think it's important that we recognize that some of the activities that are involved in creating music are inevitably going to be subsumed into generative models. And that hopefully frees us or inspires us or compels us to go off and do other things and invest our creativity in things that are truly creative. But I really think that it's important for us to parse all of these things, to pull out some of our bias, to own the things that are important to us. And if you don't want to turn on an AI engine, you don't have to. Nobody's forcing you to. You're living in a world where other people will be. Recognize that. It's okay. So I think, the last thing I wanted to say, and this is, so I've been sort of doing a survey of some AI generative engines, and this actually takes me back to, Steve, your comments about Share and Autotune. And AI at composition, at this point, there's a certain artifact that seems to be unique to AI composition. It's got a little bit of a glitchiness to it. It's a little bit ugly. It's a little bit awkward, but it's actually kind of got a thing, and it reminds me of autotune. And I have a feeling that there's going to be an entire genre that's going to emerge that's going to be based on, you know, whatever, it's some sort of quantization of some notional idea. I don't even know what to call it. I don't have a good words or semantics to describe it right now. But it seems to have a particular sound. And so I think that it turns out that rather than it purely being something that's inaccurate or inadequate or insufficient, it may turn out to be something sort of interesting and creative. And if we can do something interesting with it, cool, we've got a new thing. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I want to turn a little bit, because actually everybody's been dancing around in terms of education, right? And it's a big part of what AES does is kind of bringing up the next generation of audio engineers in anything, in broadcast, in post, in music creation. We've been talking a lot about music creation. So if we could take a little bit of time, because I do want to leave time for live Q&A. We've still got over 200 people in the meeting, and the chat is open. So we'll start to queue up some questions. We already have a couple that we haven't addressed yet. But I want to just talk about education. Can this be used? Well, I'm just going to say education, AI, and I'll start with Dr. Ackerman.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about education. By the way, this has been absolutely fascinating listening to your perspectives. If I might just say one thing that sort of leads into education from the previous discussion. Yes, AI is going towards automation, and some companies are focusing on that because there are some people for whom this is valuable to have AI that can make music at a hit of a button. And that's concerning to a lot of people. I think what's important to stress here is that the solution to that is not to say, we don't want AI, please make it go away, because it's just not going to happen, because there are people who know how to make AI who are going to build it, regardless of what the rest of us think. The solution is to concurrently build AI systems that help musicians. And those systems are not the same. It's a very different thing to take even the same AI engine and work towards making an autonomous system that competes with musicians and building it towards a system that helps musicians. And so I focus on the latter. So I just wanted to emphasize that AI and people who build it, don't all, we have different goals, and it's important to help musicians with AI. That's the attitude I have. Education, the systems we build, the generative systems we build, are inherently educational. And the reason is that they act as training wheels on a bike. The most frustrating thing about learning a new thing, if those of you who can imagine, going back in time when you didn't know how to make music and how hard it was to get started, is that at first, without certain tools, you can't make anything. So I really struggled, for example, with songwriting for a long time. And the problem is that I couldn't really make anything half decent. And the AI tools they're like training wheels on a bike. So a kid can use our Alicia system. So that's an app, and it's geared towards helping amateurs in particular. And right away, they have a song. Within the first few minutes, they have a song. But instead of saying, okay, I'm done, I guess my song is over, I want to be lazy, what you actually see them do is they go deeper and deeper. They start editing the melodies. They start editing the lyric suggestions. And then very, very fast, often within the very first song, they start typing their own lyrics. People in studies who told us that they don't know how to write lyrics, within half an hour were writing their own lyrics, just because they keep getting prompted by the AI, and it doesn't look so difficult anymore. And the same thing with melodies. Over time, they learn how to create their own melodies. And it all happens very quickly and very confidently and without this frustration. So a lot of our tools, so Lyric Studio and Alicia, are used to teach people how to write songs, even when they don't realize sometimes that it's educational. So a lot of the applications are explicitly by I'm actually giving a talk tomorrow, organized by the Office of Education, geared for teachers and parents. To essentially, it helps teach creative writing and songwriting in a remote setting.
Julius, you want to talk about
Yeah, I just like to react to partly to that. Do you think that using AI tools and promoting and creating AI tools is how we show a good example? I understand the part that we can enable those who don't want to take the time to learn how to write music, how to write lyrics, and all that, and that enables them to have fun. So basically, amateurs can use these tools to feel like they can do more than what they experienced or trained themselves to do, because they're using these pre-existing experiences and their combinations by using these tools. But I also, obviously, it's a huge market, so I can't blame a company if they choose to go to that direction. I also can't blame, Jonathan mentioned production music. I can't blame the really large companies who want to cut staff and take care of some of the automation. And I know that, without mentioning the name of companies, I know about several companies who are developing in-house tools that get rid of editors, whether it's a game company, those that create the production music. And I understand, because they're saving money and they turn out a lot of content. So probably over time, that's a significant amount. But those professionals, especially our guests on this call, is where I just don't see. My biggest question is why? Like, why have these tools? I think we're doing just fine without it. And the most complaints I hear when I talk to professionals, especially engineers, those who build their business, those who have not reached quite the level that maybe we have, or Steve has with his facility, but those who, a typical small business, is spending 3/4 or 2/3 of their time networking and trying to get the work, and they're happy when they can sit in front of the computer or the board and actually enjoy the reason they got into this whole thing of working with audio, enjoy the process. Why are we creating tools that make the process more efficient or faster or more this or that, and potentially, and I've read a lot of arguments about this. Well, you can have more free time. Well, as someone who grew a small business on 2 different continents, which means that I had to restart from scratch, I know that when you're growing a business, all your time goes into first surviving, then trying to grow and maintain your position. And I would like to spend more time actually struggling with those audio challenges, and during that struggle come up with the most creative and most interesting solutions that make me happy. So if we're getting more philosophical, then the big picture is what makes you happy. Does it make you happy? Watch a tool giving you some ideas and solutions, push the button and then make the selection at the end, approve or not approve, or kind of the road getting there is what is, in my opinion, the most fun for a lot of people involved with audio, and the struggles and the trials. And then when you finally get on the top of that hill that's so hard to climb, or I don't like to fly. I have no problem flying, but I prefer to drive. Let me tell you real quick this story / analogy. When I came to the US about 20 years ago, and after a few years, I heard everyone telling me that, yeah, you like to travel and explore, go ahead, but don't go to Kansas because there's nothing to see there. It's like, that's not possible. It's a huge area. There must be something cool. So I'm going to challenge them. I jumped into a car, and I wanted to go I grew up on Wizard of Oz, so I wanted to go to Liberty, Kansas, and, just for the fun of it. Guess what? I could have flown to Wichita or Kansas City or wherever. I didn't. I drove, and I've done many road trips. That was the most memorable road trip because the people I randomly met on the way there, the journey itself was much more fun than the destination. And I don't think that we have enough time and attention to ever use as much for creativity and for the creative process as we would like, because we have so many tasks in these crazy busy lives. I don't think we should focus on making that easier, but rather, why don't we take care of the business tasks with AI?
So, but Julia, so your analogy of driving is actually an excellent one, because for that trip, you wanted to be in control of the car. But if you were in rush hour, you probably would have wanted everybody there to have a properly functioning automated car. Traffic would probably be way better during rush hour. So there may be a time and a place where AI in that particular analogy would have a good function. I wanted to just go back to Gibbs' question about, or prompt about education. You know, one of the things that I think is absolutely true is that it's really hard for young people to have access to mentorship in the way that we used to have access to mentorship. Sure, you know, there's YouTube videos and there's a lot of access to information, good, bad, and indifferent. But in terms of actually getting training and understanding best practices, it's become increasingly difficult. And this is a place where AI actually can be helpful in education. If we can represent best practices, and this is, I'm gonna sort of bring this over to audio engineering and processing as opposed to the generative side. Although you could probably also make this argument around music theory and so on. But if we can represent best practices, give people exercises where they compare their work against a model of best practices around frequency distribution, understanding the relationship between what's on their tune mix and what they're hearing in their speakers, and help them navigate some of those challenges. I think that's a place where AI has proven to be enormously helpful and has augmented or filled a bit of a void that exists that I think is driven because of the changes in studios, studio economies, where people do music production. And it's actually brought some of that information to people who are not in metropolitan areas, who don't have access, you know, the way people do in New York or LA, or well, these days, nobody has access to anything because everybody's staying home. But you get my point. I think there is a place in education where AI can be enormously valuable in delivering the idea of best practices and measurements.
My concern is less so with the effectiveness of these tools in education, but rather, you know, I might be very pessimistic, but just in my lifetime, what I've seen in 3 different political systems and 3 different cultures is that people are inherently lazy and they go for convenience. And my concern is if they become reliant on these tools, telling them what to do. Sure, they can be used as great training tools. I have introduced some in my classes still to this day. 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago when I got into education, I received questions at the end of my studio production classes from students who completed their songs, and they asked me, can I refer them to a mastering engineer that they can sit down and work with? Now, almost always the question is, shall I go with Lender or which one of the online mastering services? Because, you know, they master like 300-something thousand songs a month. And not having the experience of actually going through the process. I'm not trying to be old school here, but so much I learned from sitting down with the professionals who really carried the knowledge with them, and I learned so much from them that the use of AI in education, if it's an augmentative thing, I have no problem with it. But I don't trust, not us, not our intentions, but how it's actually going to be used because of people opting for the convenient, the cheap, the fast, the lazy solutions. That's my concern.
I'm a little more optimistic, I guess, or a little less cynical about people in general wanting that sort of push button solution. I think that people will get bored. Well, after a while, you know, after a while pushing Casio presets is like, you know, it's not really making my life better. But I totally agree with you, by the way. You're talking to a mastering engineer. And I learn by sitting next to people. And I would wish that for all of my students. And I think that the education has to be curated, right? It has to be put into a system where there's a measurable learning outcome and where there's guided exercises and so on and so forth. It in and of itself can't tell the whole story. But I think it goes exactly to your point that not everybody has access in the same way that we wish they did. And I think that this can help augment their access.
I wanted to also add to this discussion that it depends on the tool very much. I mean, I'm sure that, Julius's experience of people not wanting to engage with real engineers in certain contexts where they used to, it's a very real concern. But this idea of laziness and doing less on their own does not align with what we're seeing with the use of our products. It just doesn't align with what's happening. In fact, the more people use the tools, the more independent they seem to become. So, you have somebody come in who is maybe not very comfortable writing lyrics, and then as they use Lyric Studio for a while, even within the same session, you kind of watch them at first making, just selecting, and then suddenly start to edit, and then suddenly start to write their own stuff. And that's the standard use case. This is what classically happens. Because of the way that we're presenting the AI, because we're not presenting the AI as the thing that gives you the solution. We're presenting it much like a human collaborator that has ideas, except you're in charge. I'm sure you can easily imagine how having a songwriter next to you collaborate with you will be a good educational experience. And that's exactly what AI should be imitating. That's what we're focusing on and what I want to see more in the AI space. People taking the creative side seriously and making the human more creative with AI. And that's what we're starting to think. AI is very, very powerful. It doesn't have to be used the way that you're seeing Google and Facebook and all these people use it, with a ground truth, with a real solution. It can be used towards making people more creative, and that's what we're doing. And that's what more people should be doing.
Yeah, I'd also like to assert, I know that we're talking about education, and education lends itself to talking about okay, the use of AI is going to be for decision making, and that's how you get educated by AI, is because you see an AI make a decision and you are the student and you learn something. But I'd really like to assert that there's a little bit of a buy-in that you also need to some extent trust some of these music technologists in a certain way. That I truly believe that AI is going to be the next big way that you will even be able to manipulate sound. And the same way that we view sound synthesis in the way that we do, AI is going to be the kind of next evolution, the next big thing in terms of that wave. So actually the other piece of education is going to be that there's going to be so many new ways that you can be able to do things that you weren't able to do before, that is going to kind of come naturally out of it. And I know that you didn't like the idea of talking about bringing up MIDI and stuff like that, but in terms of the buy-in thing, I think it's important, because I think that anyone that probably heard early MIDI stuff and they're like, here's a violin, you're probably like, why are you thinking about this? This is never a violin. This is never going to sound like a violin. You guys are kind of wasting your time on certain things. Not to say that it's replacing real violin players, but MIDI has come a long way since then. And again, don't take it so literally, but I feel that as things progress on this end, the advent of machine learning and AI in terms of sound synthesis and ways to manipulate sounds is going to blow your mind. It's going to be the first time you heard a vocoder, how you felt when you heard that. You're like, whoa, that's crazy. I feel like the same thing is, I don't know if it's decades away or decade away or years away, but I think it's all there, and people are aspiring towards that.
Just for clarification, the whole MIDI argument, my problem with that is that MIDI is simply a protocol. It's a language, it's a tool. And yes, that enabled people to do what they were not able to do before, as far as the technology and without having to learn necessarily to play every instrument. At the same time, that's still not content. There's no substance behind it. It's just a tool. It's just a protocol. When we're talking about AI offering up new content that I didn't think of, but there it is, and I can use that, to me that's dishonest, because how would I be expressing thoughts authentically through the language of music that didn't come from me?
So how about
come from my experience?
Do you feel that it's cheating to collaborate with somebody on a song?
No, because both people put in their experiences and their feelings, so they're both authentic. But if you're talking about a tool that just generates or creates combinations, there's no concept behind it. If we get together and write, I don't write lyrics, okay? So if one of you write lyrics and we have an experience and we discuss what we want to write a song about, I write the music, you write the lyrics. we kind of have that sort of common experience. You bring in your feelings and about whatever the topic is, but it's not generated, it's experienced. You're channeling your already experienced experiences, as opposed to using data to generate them.
Arguably AI has a lot of knowledge and experience as well, just a very different nature than humans. What I'm really hearing, Julius, if you'll forgive me, is human bias, the idea that only humans are allowed to be creative, and sort of a bias against the concept of a machine having legitimate creativity.
Not so much about creativity, but what's the substance behind it? You can create, a kid can create something, and there have been many experiments when kids' drawing was put into famous museums and people would be looking at it with awe. That doesn't make it art because there's no concept behind it.
Also just interesting to note, I have seen experiences where people have responded emotionally to machine-generated music. So at least in the ear of the observer, in the heart of the observer, it triggered something for them. That doesn't go to your point, Julius, about intention and the sort of creative intention, but it's interesting to note that they're really two separate things.
I was writing film scores and TV scores for 20 years, and I can distinctly tell you which job was completely functional and which job was the one that I sat down with the director and we really wanted to be and had to be on the same page. And that was new. That wouldn't no one would experience if we don't have that conversation and sit down and create it. And that was authentic. The first one I can see AI doing, the second one I can't.
So, for example, in music therapy, so there's a lot of research showing that songwriting is very, very therapeutic. And then the role of the music therapist becomes to help the person express themselves because they don't have the technical skill. And so it's not about, the goal at least is not for the music therapist to express themselves and to share their experiences, but to provide the expertise so the client can do that. And that's how I view the role of the AI. It's there to help the person find themselves, right?
In that sense, it's functional, and I would be fine with it. It's less so art, it's more functional.
Well, it's supporting the human expression. And if we equate art with expression, then that's okay. Then the art belongs on the human side.
So with 14 minutes left, I wanted to allow a couple of questions, but any other comments from the
panel? I guess all I want to say with regards to that is, Julius, I understand what you're saying. I guess what I'm asserting is that you will see machine learning come up more in the realm of sound effects, audio effects, in ways that I think that might surprise you. The same way that, you put a delay on a track now, and sometimes it has to have it achieves a particular aesthetic. And my hope is that machine learning researchers in audio will be able to create new aesthetics that will wow all of us.
Why are we not seeing more of that already? Because what I'm is like, for example, functions in Maya, when you have a model that you 3D modeled, the data is collected by an algorithm and that creates the sound for like a spring or a Coke can that's being crushed. So the sound designer doesn't have to come up with it, but it's all kind of, just generative. Why do we keep seeing all these exploitations of the technology, not in the new creative ways, except for some horrific releases that are a pain to listen to? But why aren't we seeing that we would like to see? Because I agree with most of you when you're talking about, it could be cool if AI did this and you could use it selectively. But that's not what we're saying. I keep reading the articles about how companies are using AI to give the simple tool in the hands of those who would be the client of studios, who would be, and I'm not concerned about these. Personally, that's not the concern. I am concerned about the people, but it's not what's driving my concerns because I'm not running my studio anymore. But taking the human more and more out of it is my problem. The other day I downloaded HumTap. I don't know if you've heard of or used that application where you hum into it and tap, and it creates the music. Now, what I did, I reversed it. I hummed and tapped the melody and the rhythmic pattern of one of my own compositions from a couple of years before. And it, feeling-wise, what it was communicating, what came out of it, and I tried it with every environment that they offer, was absolutely nothing to do with it. So I'm not seeing this being utilized as a really creativity enhancing technology, but rather as something that for the masses makes it accessible, what so far professionals have been doing.
Yeah, so HamTap is more about, it's what we call a casual creator. It makes it very, very easy to use. And that's not the only kind of assistive technology we obviously have. So there's a whole spectrum from AI does everything to human does everything and every point in between.
So I'll use that and maybe go to Shahan or Jonathan on a question that was in the chat a while back, is that can we look at AI as an instrument? And I think that the question's posed maybe not so much tonally, but maybe like as another player or as a musical instrument.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure I understand what about AI would lead one to say no. If it is giving you a prompt, what you do with that prompt is up to the creative. So you know, it's funny. It's almost like a binary thing. You know, you get a suggestion from an AI, and it's like, yes, I'll go down that route, or I'm going to do, or no, I'm going to do the opposite. So I don't see why not. That may be an overly simplistic answer. Shahan, Gibbs called us out, so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like generally speaking, algorithmic music has existed for a while. You know, it can kind of take on a primitive form, but like you actually have some say in, like, you know, you can even think of it in like a modular synth setting of like how you take one oscillator and feed it to be like something about the rhythm or the pitch of something else, and kind of like spiral up this whole crazy a mangle of wires, and that you can imagine, and there are also like live scripting environments, and some you know, you can have different types of scripts and stuff like that. So having an AI script in the mix of that for music making is, I guess it could be considered maybe some sort of a form of instrument playing. Like, I still think it needs a little bit more meat on it before like there's like a definitive way of being able to answer the question. Like, but there is kind of like, is there someone that plays, I don't know if this is kind of like a similar analogy, but like, you know, we used to play traditional instruments, and then there are some people that are like bona fide MPC players, or can play like the Launchpad, whatever, grids in certain different ways. And I think that just here to really enable AI as an instrument, we just kind of need to figure out where that plug is that kind of keeps on progressing that. But the fact that algorithmic music and scripting within DAWs has existed for a while makes me feel it's more yes than no.
I'd like to point out a sort of historical parallel, if I can. Maya had mentioned that when keyboard pianos came in, that they were considered invalid as musical instruments, and I just want to address the sort of Luddite argument that these automated and generative systems are going to cost people jobs, or that it's going to make certain kinds of musical collaboration moot or whatever. And I just want to point out that at every stage of technological development, and this is going back to the point where the first written notation came out for music, the existing paradigm felt threatened by the new technological development, and feared it as a way of like, if the court musicians who had learned from an oral tradition or from an apprenticeship could be replaced by someone who was just mechanically reading notes off of a page, well, then the economy of the court musician was threatened. You know, when the phonograph came in, the fear was that if people could hear Caruso in their living rooms, that they wouldn't pay to go to the opera house or whatever. And then when widespread distribution of music started happening on the internet, the existing record business was terrified because it meant that people would no longer be buying records. And what I want to point out is that each of these technological developments, from the basic of writing musical notation to the internet distribution of music to now the automated generating of music, is making music more accessible to more people, and it's broadening the audience of music and creating a taste for music among people who would never otherwise have had a chance to experience, even in a crippled form, the notion of creating their own music, which is what these tools, as using the term collaborators, could enable in these people, in people, right? So I think it's a mistake to fear that as a development. I think that yes, the AI is not a person with an intent, but the AI has learned from the experiences and intents of all the people that got it to the point where it could make a suggestion. It has incorporated and embodied all of that prior knowledge. It cannot, by definition, come up with a moment of inspiration. It cannot, by definition, do something new or transmute or synthesize one emotion or expression into a different emotion or expression. It can't do that because it has to learn, which is why it's called intelligent. It has learned from other people's tastes and expressions. But and so in the sense of it being a collaborator, it could be a collaborator who is incapable of having an original thought. And we've all worked with people who are collaborators of that nature. And I don't think it's unique to machines, that kind of a humbling limitation. So taken in that context, I don't think there's any reason to fear AI. I just want to underscore the notion that AI has learned and AI learns and internalizes a notion of correctness, or a notion of propriety, or a notion of quality, which has got it to a point where it could make a suggestion, or where it could make some kind of a creative gesture. And I think everyone would agree that the most valuable moments in music come from people who have not simply regurgitated notions of correctness that they've received from their prior teaching or from their prior experience, but people who have made a kind of a creative break. And that happens with an individual who is driven by a mania, or who has some quirk of personality, or some depth of perception that no one up to that point has had. And so that's why I think that for this functional work, where no one cares how good the music is in a beer commercial, no one cares how good the backing vocal is in a comedy sketch, like for those sorts of things, for trivial music, for recording that has no creative inspiration at its source, where it's not something that anyone has any emotional investment in, I think there's no reason to fear AI as a tool, or as a musical instrument, or as a crippled and dumb collaborator. I think all of those are perfectly valid notions. My fear is that it becomes baked into systems that default to this received notion of normalcy, received notion of propriety, and received notion of correctness. I want to point out that while we were in this discussion, I received a very sad text from a friend of mine telling me that his father had passed away. And he said, "I wanted you to know, because you are on the short list of friends who knew him." And the shirt in that sentence was, of course, a predictive text, where his phone thought he was trying to tell me about his father's passing because my name was written on a shirt. And that kind of humbling error in something as grave as that should give everyone pause about turning over any significant creative decisions to something that cannot know the context of what it's telling you.
I could not agree anymore about the context and how you make those decisions and how many billions of things influence you. And to me, that's precisely what makes you a human, and that's what makes a performer a performer. When I'm on stage and I'm playing an instrument like this one behind me, or any MP-enabled instrument, where you can get really expressive. I don't care if it's CV or MIDI or an acoustic instrument. That's not the point. The point is, I use that instrument in a way that I can channel my feelings, the reactions from the audience, that place, that time, that only exists in that moment, in that city, in that venue, and it never before and never after. And that cannot be learned because it never existed before. I could not agree more with Steve's comments.
A lot, just have to correct there, a lot of stuff that generative AI creates has not been created before. That's why it's generative, and often what it creates is insightful. And I do want to emphasize again that Julius, you're very, very fortunate that you have the ability to be creative from scratch. A lot of people, in order to express themselves, either they need more support or they enjoy being creative in a way that has more input. And I think we need to be inclusive in how we view creativity and view expression and how we're willing to support it.
And anytime as this comes up, and I've given talks about this, I have theories, I have diagrams on my website if anyone cares about it. How you actually create, how you come to that conclusion. What are the role of previous influences that you don't even know about because you were 3 when you heard the piece of music, but somehow the melody just sounds familiar. All that, if you combine that, to me the answer is outside of music. The experiences that we collect outside of music is what we end up packaging and using music as a language to express ourselves as human beings. If you take the human alphabet because you offer musical solutions, then you're using grammar. You're using a grammar solution, and that's not what I want to say, but it's how I'm saying it. I care less about how it's being said. I care more about what is being said. And I think a human experience or human feeling can be only expressed if it's done by a human who experienced that. And AI might generate new ideas and new combinations, but again, to me, that's without substance. There's no context. It's just playing with data, playing with ones and zeros, and coming up with something that has not been exploited before. Can it be somehow resonate with people? Yes. Why? Because it makes them feel in a certain way that they had experienced as humans before. So as an enabler, I see that yes, AI can make people feel in a certain way, and I know that had happened before. But as a composer, as a performer, I think I have enough experiences outside of music, just as a human, that I'm ready to express and share with many other people.
Of course, it's all. I mean, this is
rather than.
I think.
I'm sorry. I just don't think that the tool, the language, should give me options. What else I could use in my expression? A collaborator, absolutely. As a matter of fact, my last thing I think I will say for today is I ran an experiment last year where I had audiences of almost 3,000 people in LA for a convention that I was asked to write a theme for, and I performed that where people could use their cell phones, flashlights, to influence how the music is going to go and what's happening with the music, both different plugins and settings and filters and parts muted and parts coming in. So that was a collective decision-making experience. I was collaborating with 3,000 people, and that created new results. If we can do that as humans, and the crowd was actually, I had to react to what the crowd was doing. We reversed the roles. The crowd was deciding, the audience was deciding where the music should go based on their culture and aesthetic, choices. And I was reacting and improvising on top of that on stage, influenced by the choice of the audience just by using their cell phones. And a lot of variables, of course, were happening. And now that was an experience that I called it actually, and pun intended, I actually called that human intelligence control. Because I think we can do better than that as humans. with collaboration, with these kind of interactive setups, then AI can without a concept, because all 3,000 people were living that moment in that time.
And with that, we're at the top of the hour. And we've gone a full 2. For those that are part of the AES event and machine learning, which I just posted the link to in the chat, the AES show, there's going to be a lot of conversation around this. Shahan, Maya, Julius, Steve, Jonathan, and Alexander, I think I see the sun starting to poke through your window there. Thank you for staying up all night with us. And I don't think this could have gone any better. This discussion was fantastic. So if any of you have any closing remarks.
I would like to just wrap up by saying a couple of things. So I'm the event chair for the AI event that's taking place. We're lucky enough to have Maya joining us also as part of that, as part of our industry panel. And we've got Holly Herndon, who's a composer who has trained in AI to be a performer in her band, who's giving her the keynote. So that should be kind of fascinating. And going to what Brian, the plea to join AES, if you're not a member of AES, if you sign up for one event, for the non-AES member event, you become a member. And then you get an incredible amount of programming for the cost of about 3 Starbucks coffees. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's going to Starbucks anymore, but maybe they are in anyway, I'm sorry. Oop, I'm not going to say that. So anyway, so I just wanted to make sure to augment that message. If you're interested in hearing more about specific applications of the way AI is showing up in generative and signal processing tools, I hope you'll join us then, September 28th and 29th. And thank you, Gib, so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yes, Julius is a master.
Julius, I still love you.
Don't kick me out of the AES as president-elect.
Yes, Jonathan, thank you for joining us. And Steve, any closing comments?
I just want to say that I really appreciate how seriously everybody is taking all of the conceptual breaks that are necessitated by technology as sophisticated and with as many implications as AI. I'm glad that nobody is being cavalier about it, and I just appreciate how seriously everybody's taking it. I learned a lot.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Alexander, Maya, Shahan.
I have too much to say, so I'm just going to say thank you, everyone, for their time. I really enjoyed this.
Perfect. Restrain of pen and tongue. Alexander?
I think my takeaway is that in the end, AI is just a technology, and it's our responsibility to handle it in the way that we want it to be handled as developers, but also always with the possible potential problems that could arise in mind, and to always be it's a new tool, it's exciting to do a lot with it, but always keep in mind that we should not overdo it, So there is a certain responsibility when using new tools, new technologies, and that's exciting, but it's, it was very interesting listening to everyone here, because it's a very different view on certain things compared to what my personal view is, and that's always good to hear.
Awesome. And Maya?
So I think one of the only things I didn't have a chance to say is that, but I think other people have alluded to, is that as we introduce more tools, we see humans come up with amazing new things that the creators of the tools themselves could have never conceived. So I don't think, for example, when digital audio workstations came out, that anybody had any idea that it was going to create entirely new genres of music. And I know it's just history has shown us that AI will allow us to create new types of music. It's going to end up pushing music forward, because humans, and again, I'm repeating somebody on the panel, can't help being creative. And I invite you to try it for yourself. Try the tools that are out there, and then make your own decisions about whether you like them or not, and whether, more importantly, they're the right way for you to express yourselves. Because despite all the arguments I had with Julius, I think we both agree 100% that it's all about helping people express themselves.
Awesome. get on a mailing list for your local AES chapter. If you join AES, you can go into your settings and connect with multiple chapters. You can make San Francisco your primary and then choose others as your secondary and get information from all over the globe around what AES is doing. And to our committee that are behind the scenes with their video off, thank you for managing mutes, Mark and Ken and Dana, managing mutes and videos and all of those things that were going on in the background to make this run smooth. So just get in content, get this stuff as much in your head as you can. And then, like we talked about tonight, what you do with it is up to you. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the panelists. And with that, we will say adieu. Peace and love, everyone.